Hold up, stop scrolling right now because what went down on SportsCenter's emergency NFL trade deadline coverage regarding Rick Woolen and the Raiders is going to completely rewire how you think about Pete Carroll's defensive philosophy, buy low trade opportunities, and whether Las Vegas can salvage their secondary before this entire season spirals into complete disaster. We're talking about a legitimate trade scenario that actually makes strategic sense for both organizations. And when the panel started breaking down the cornerback depth charts, the contract situations, and the historical connections between Carroll and players he's developed, I literally had to pause the segment and rewind, because this isn't some fantasy football pipe dream. This is a real transaction that could go down within the next 2 weeks. Hey Raiders fans! If you're following along with this analysis, I have a dream: to hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel. It would be incredible to have you on this journey with me. Go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let's grow together. Your subscription means the world to me and the future of this channel. Now, let's keep going because there's still so much more to discuss. So I'm watching SportsCenter right as they're going through their Week 5 trade rumors segment, and suddenly they pivot to the Raiders' defensive secondary situation. And you could feel the entire energy in that studio shift because this isn't just another speculative "wouldn't it be cool if" scenario. This is genuine organizational need meeting market opportunity, meeting coaching relationships that matter in ways casual fans completely underestimate. When you've got a Pete Carroll-coached team desperately needing cornerback help, and a former Pete Carroll draft pick who's fallen out of favor in Seattle but was absolutely dominant during his rookie and sophomore seasons under that same coach, you don't ignore those dots. You connect them and see if there's a deal to be made. Let me paint the complete picture of what really transpired during this absolutely fascinating SportsCenter breakdown, because the surface-level Raiders might trade for a struggling corner narrative that you're seeing on Twitter right now completely misses the desperation, the tactical calculation, the personnel evaluation nuances, and the organizational chess moves that make this potential transaction so compelling. Stephen A. Smith was going absolutely nuclear about the Raiders' secondary depth, and when Stephen A. dedicates an entire segment to defensive backs rather than quarterbacks or skill position players, you know the situation has reached crisis levels. Here's the foundational crisis that the SportsCenter panel established right at the opening, and this context is absolutely crucial for understanding why the Woolen trade makes sense right now rather than waiting until the traditional trade deadline. Eric Stokes suffered a knee injury in Week 4 against the Bears and had to leave the game early. Now, Stokes has been the Raiders' #1 cornerback through the first 4 weeks. Not because he's an all-pro talent, but because the depth chart behind him is absolutely terrifying when you actually examine who's available. Stokes himself has dealt with knee injuries throughout his entire career, missing more games than he's played in his first few NFL seasons, with some legitimately scary freak injuries that make you question his long-term durability. Kendrick Perkins made this point during the segment that really crystallized the urgency. When your CB1 goes down and you're looking at your depth chart, wondering who steps up, and the answer is a bunch of guys who either haven't played, are injured themselves, or have been getting cooked in limited action. That's not a depth problem. That's an organizational emergency that requires immediate intervention. Cameron Richardson hasn't played since Week 1 due to a lingering hamstring injury. Nate Hobbs is someone that literally nobody in the Raiders organization has confidence in based on what they've seen. Darnay Holmes got some opportunities and looked pretty damn good, according to Perkins's assessment, but he's unproven. Kai Blue Kelly has been so bad the past 2 weeks that the panel was using terms like "grandma getting out of the tub" to describe his lateral movement and recovery speed. That's your cornerback room right now if you're the Raiders. That's what Pete Carroll is looking at, and realizing that if Stokes misses extended time, or if his knee issues become chronic again, this defense could get absolutely shredded by competent passing attacks. And here's where the Rick Woolen connection becomes so strategically perfect, it almost feels orchestrated by football gods who understand narrative symmetry. The Seattle side of the equation got extensive coverage during the segment, and this is where insider knowledge about depth chart politics and organizational decision-making really matters. The Sports Center crew brought in their Seahawks beat reporter, who explained that Josh Jobe and Devin Witherspoon are playing extremely well right now in Seattle's secondary. Witherspoon was a high draft pick who dealt with an early injury, but now that he's healthy, he's living up to that premium selection. Meanwhile, Darian Kinchins, who wasn't even supposed to be a starter, has stepped up in the nickel role and has been absolutely balling out with 2 interceptions that could have easily been 4 based on opportunities created. So where does that leave Rick Woolen? He's facing a legitimate benching scenario where Witherspoon takes his outside cornerback role, Jobe maintains his starting spot on the other side, and Kinchins locks down the nickel, which means Woolen becomes a 4th corner, who's just hanging around without a defined role. And here's the critical organizational psychology that Brian Windhorst emphasized during his analysis. If you're Seattle, and you know Woolen might get benched soon, his trade value craters the moment he's not starting. Right now, you can sell him as a young starting cornerback who had a rough start to the season. 2 weeks from now, when he's a backup, you're selling damaged goods that other teams can acquire for pennies on the dollar. The buy low opportunity discussion became a major theme throughout the segment, and Richard Jefferson made this brilliant analogy about clearance rack shopping that perfectly captured the Raiders' perspective. Woolen has gotten progressively worse each season since Pete Carroll left Seattle. His PFF grades are absolutely brutal right now. 40.4 overall on 269 snaps, which are bottom-of-the-league numbers for a starting cornerback. He's in a contract year, and Seattle has made it clear they don't want to pay him. He's fallen out of favor with the new coaching staff. All of those factors combine to create a situation where his market value is at rock bottom, despite the fact that just 2 years ago he looked like a future Pro Bowl corner who could have legitimately competed for Defensive Player of the Year as a rookie. But here's the genius of Pete Carroll's potential involvement, and this is where the panel really dove deep into coaching relationships and player development philosophy. Woolen was selected by Pete Carroll in the 5th round of the 2022 NFL Draft out of UTSA. His best 2 years as a professional were under Carroll's defensive system in Seattle. When you talk about the prototypical Pete Carroll cornerback, you're describing a 6'4", 210-pound athletic freak with elite length and recovery speed who can press at the line and run stride for stride with receivers downfield. That's not just Woolen's measurables, that's literally the exact player archetype that Carroll has built his entire defensive philosophy around for 2 decades. The 2022 rookie numbers that the panel put up on screen were absolutely staggering and served as a reminder of what Woolen looks like when properly deployed. 16 pass breakups, 6 interceptions, and teams that tested him early in the season quickly stopped throwing his direction because he was making them pay. His 2023 sophomore campaign was still very productive with 53 tackles, 2 picks, and 11 pass breakups. These aren't marginal NFL player numbers. These are legitimate starting cornerback statistics that suggest high-level talent when placed in the right system. So the central question that Stephen A. kept hammering throughout the segment, can Pete Carroll recreate that magic? Can he take a player who's clearly struggling in Seattle's post-Carroll defensive scheme and restore him to the form that made him one of the league's most promising young corners just 2 seasons ago? The panel was split on this, and honestly, that's what made the debate so compelling. Max Kellerman was arguing that sometimes players just peak early and then decline, that Woolen's struggles might be indicative of fundamental limitations that no coaching can overcome. But Perkins countered with multiple examples of Pete Carroll resurrecting cornerback careers. Players who looked washed elsewhere and then became lockdown coverage guys under Carroll's tutelage and defensive system. The trade package speculation became the most engaging part of the segment because they actually brought in proposals from different perspectives to show what a realistic deal might look like. The first proposal came from Seattle's perspective. Their dream scenario, where they maximize return on a depreciating asset. The Seahawks would want Jackson Powers Johnson, the Raiders' best offensive lineman and a promising young interior player. The SportsCenter panel universally laughed this off as completely unrealistic. You don't trade your best offensive lineman when Colton Miller is potentially done for the season with a high ankle sprain and hairline fracture. That's organizational malpractice that gets general managers fired. The second proposal was what the Seahawks reporter considered realistic, a 2026 fourth-round pick. The logic here is that the Raiders might be willing to slightly overpay because of the Carroll connection and because they're desperate for secondary help. Plus, as Bobby Marks pointed out while breaking down the compensation pick system, the Raiders will have extra fourth-round compensatory picks, so they're not actually depleting their draft capital in any meaningful way by surrendering one fourth-rounder. But the proposal that really got the panel debating was the one that mirrors what Seattle originally invested in Woolen, a fifth-round pick. The analogy that got used repeatedly was perfect. Imagine you bought a car in 2022, drove it for 3 years, and then sold it in 2025 for exactly what you originally paid. If that car isn't serving your needs anymore, and you have no intention of paying for an expensive new contract to keep it, that's a win-win transaction. Seattle recoups their original investment in a player who no longer fits their plans, and the Raiders acquire a high-upside talent at rock-bottom cost. Here's what really emerged from the entire SportsCenter coverage that I think makes this trade not just possible but probable. The Raiders are desperate, Seattle is motivated, and the compensation makes sense for both sides. A fifth-round pick for a former high-performing corner who's struggling in the wrong system but could potentially thrive again under the coach who originally developed him? That's exactly the kind of calculated risk that championship-level organizations take when trying to address glaring weaknesses without mortgaging their future. This could absolutely happen, and if it does, don't be surprised when Woolen looks like a completely different player in silver and black.